Midnight cloaked the headquarters of Collins Defense Group in sterile silence. The glass tower loomed over the city, its top floors lit like a beacon for no one in particular. Evelyn Collins stepped out of her private elevator, heels clicking in the cavernous parking garage. She was 25, CEO of America's fifth-largest defense contractor, and she carried herself like someone who had learned to live with the weight of an empire on her shoulders. Her black sedan waited by the curb, the driver already inside. She reached for the door, then froze. 3 figures stepped from the shadows. Black tactical gear, masks, weapons that didn't waver. Mercenaries, not amateurs. They moved with crisp precision, closing the distance in seconds. A hand wrenched her arm, another stripped her phone from her grasp. Zip ties bit into her wrists. A hood smothered her vision, pressing darkness against her skin. No one shouted. No one threatened. The quiet professionalism of it made her pulse spike harder than a scream ever could. By the time she was shoved into the back of another vehicle, Evelyn knew whoever had ordered this had planned it well. She woke to the smell of rust and mildew. Her wrists ached from her restraints, her shoulders screaming from being forced into one position for too long. Somewhere in the blackness, water dripped in irregular intervals. The air was heavy with the cold stillness of a building abandoned long ago. A warehouse, she guessed. The floor beneath her was concrete, gritty under her palms when she tried to shift. Hopelessness crept in with the damp air. No phone, no idea where she was, and no reason to believe anyone knew she was missing. Her meetings for tomorrow were packed. By the time her absence was noted, she could be anywhere or nowhere. Then she heard it. Not footsteps. Not exactly. More like the soft whisper of movement above her head, something too deliberate to be a rat or the settling of old beams. She held her breath. A shadow dropped from somewhere high, landing with the silent precision of a predator. A muffled struggle exploded in the darkness. Thuds, a sharp gasp, the crunch of impact. The sound of bodies hitting the floor, one after another, in quick, efficient succession. When the last man fell, the hood was torn from her head. Dim light from a cracked window spilled across the face of her rescuer. Evelyn's breath caught. It was Jack. Jack Dawson, her husband in name only. The man she treated like a formality, an inconvenient arrangement her father had forced upon her. The man she had relegated to working the lowliest security shifts in her own company as repayment for some vague family debt she had never understood. And here he was, standing over the unconscious bodies of her captors, eyes sharp and unreadable. Evelyn had spent years looking down on him, never knowing that the man she barely acknowledged had just saved her life. And, if the flicker of recognition in her gut was correct, not for the first time. 3 years earlier, she had stepped into her father's chair after his helicopter went down over the Atlantic. Robert Collins had built the company from a cramped engineering workshop into a cornerstone of the Pentagon supply chain, forging deals with NATO allies and earning the respect of generals and defense ministers alike. When Evelyn took over at 22, the board had smiled politely and waited for her to fail. She hadn't. She'd fought her way through rooms full of men twice her age, learned every detail of the contracts they waved under her nose, and pushed profits higher than ever. She became known as brilliant, relentless, and cold. Behind her back, her staff called her the Ice Queen. To her face, they called her Miss Collins, never Evelyn. No one saw the sleepless nights or the decisions that weighed like lead. No one knew how her father's final words still echoed in her mind. "Marry Jack Dawson," he had rasped from his hospital bed, fingers clutching hers with a fading strength. "Our family owes him a life debt. This is how you repay it." She had agreed without understanding, chalking it up to a morphine-fueled whim. But her father had meant it. The marriage was handled like a business deal, quiet paperwork, no photos, no announcements. She had never shared an address with Jack, never introduced him to a soul, never even acknowledged him in public. She thought she was being generous by giving him a low-level job in her company's security division. A paycheck for his trouble, nothing more. But Jack Dawson had not lived the sort of life she imagined. At 36, His frame was still honed by years of discipline. His movements marked by an economy of effort only those trained to survive danger possessed. Before Collins Defense Group, he had been Master Sergeant Jack Dawson, Delta Force, one of the elite few trusted to handle the missions no one ever talked about. 14 countries, countless operations, and one mission in Kandahar that had gone catastrophically wrong. 4 hostages dead. The official report cleared him. Jack never cleared himself. When Robert Collins, his former commanding officer, found him, Jack was drifting, anchored only by guilt. The old man had made an offer, a place in his daughter's life and the means to protect her forever. Jack had accepted, not for love, but because it was a purpose. Even if it meant being invisible. Even if it meant enduring Evelyn's disdain. Now, in the dim warehouse, Evelyn stared at him as the pieces began to shift in her mind. The man she had dismissed as a glorified mall cop had just moved like a soldier. Fast, decisive, lethal. She was still processing it when he spoke. "We need to move. There might be more coming." "No, are you okay?" No dramatics. Just calm, unshakable control. Within minutes, they were in a black SUV, speeding toward the city. The night pressed in on the glass, and the silence between them was heavier than the air in that warehouse. Jack drove with surgical precision, eyes scanning constantly. Evelyn, hands trembling in her lap, watched him from the corner of her eye. Finally, he said, "You should go to a hospital." "I'm fine," she replied, sharper than she meant. "They could have drugged you. Standard procedure in situations like this." Her head snapped toward him. "And you'd know that. How exactly?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. "Pull over," she said suddenly. He obeyed without hesitation, guiding the vehicle onto the empty shoulder. "Who are you, Jack?" she demanded. "And don't feed me that security guard story. I saw what you did back there. That's not mall cop training." A long pause. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I'm exactly who your father told you I was. Someone who owed him. And I'm repaying that debt by keeping you alive." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." He put the SUV back in gear. The conversation was over, but the question burned hotter in her mind. That night, as she lay awake in her penthouse, Evelyn realized the man she had ignored for 3 years might be the only person she could truly trust. And the thought unsettled her far more than the kidnapping itself. The morning after the kidnapping, Evelyn canceled every meeting on her calendar. The official excuse was personal recovery from an incident, a phrase bland enough to keep the board from asking too many questions. In truth, she couldn't focus on anything except the man who had driven her home in silence. Jack Dawson. For 3 years, he had existed at the periphery of her life, present but forgettable, an obligation she tolerated. Last night had cracked that image like glass, and the shards kept cutting her every time she thought about it. At 8 a.m., she found herself in a nondescript rental car outside his apartment building. It was a modest 3-story brick complex in a working-class neighborhood. No doorman, no security cameras, no sign of the wealth and power she associated with her own world. She told herself she was here to thank him, but she knew better. Hours passed. He didn't appear. Eventually, her curiosity, mixed with something sharper, overpowered her pride. She slipped from the car and approached the door marked 3C. The lock was good, better than she expected. But Evelyn had learned a few tricks in college, back when her rebellion had been a quiet, private thing. One slim piece of plastic and a bit of pressure later, the door swung open. The apartment was bare, but not empty. Spartan, yes, but lived in. A worn leather couch faced a modest television. A bookshelf held an eclectic mix, military history, dense volumes on international relations, and, surprisingly, battered copies of Hemingway, Dostoevsky, and Conrad. No photographs of family. No evidence of visitors. But the wall beside his bed stopped her cold. Dozens of photographs, arranged in a meticulous grid. Men in combat gear, arms draped over each other's shoulders. Their faces were young, their eyes anything but. In some shots, Jack stood among them, alive in a way she had never seen him at Collins Defense Group. On the bedside table, A small leather case lay half open, revealing medals she couldn't fully name. Bronze stars, purple hearts, decorations that whispered of service in places the public never heard about. And then there was the locked footlocker at the bottom of the closet. It was heavy, with a military-style clasp that resisted her first attempts. She persisted. The lock gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, neatly folded newspaper clippings, each in a plastic sleeve. One headline caught her eye. Local hero saves child from vicious dog attack. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. A teenage boy with a bandaged arm stood beside a hospital bed, smiling down at a small girl. Evelyn's stomach clenched. The girl was her. 7 years old, the summer before 3rd grade. The boy was Jack. Her father's voice came back to her, hoarse, fading. Our family owes him a life debt. Evelyn sank to the floor, the photograph trembling in her hands. She had spent 3 years treating him as though he were beneath her, never realizing that he had saved her life not once, but twice. Jack returned to the apartment at exactly 6:17 p.m. The sound of the door opening jolted her from her thoughts. He saw her instantly, seated on his couch, photograph still in her grip, and showed no visible surprise. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. Breaking and entering is still a crime, he said evenly, even for CEOs. She lifted the photograph. Were you ever going to tell me? A flicker crossed his face, too fast to read. No. Why not? It wasn't relevant. Her temper flared. Not relevant? You saved my life when I was a child. My father forced me to marry you because of it, and you didn't think I should know. Jack leaned against the counter, the posture casual, but his gaze unwavering. Would it have changed anything? Would you have treated me differently? Or would you have just resented being indebted to someone you considered beneath you? The truth in his words stung. She opened her mouth to answer, but the sharp whistle of a kettle broke the moment. Jack poured water into 2 mugs, sliding one toward her, without asking if she wanted it. Who were those men last night? She asked, her voice lower now. Professionals, he said. Hired by someone who knows your security protocols well enough to bypass them. And how does a security guard have the resources to figure that out? His eyes hardened. I wasn't always a security guard. She gestured toward the wall of photographs. Delta Force. His eyebrow lifted slightly, a small crack in his guarded facade. Your father never told you? My father told me nothing except that I had to marry you. She set the mug down, untouched. I want the truth, Jack. All of it. He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing whether she deserved it. Finally, he spoke. I joined Delta to protect the world. I failed. Kandahar, 4 hostages. My call. They died because I hesitated for 1.44 seconds. The report cleared me, but I didn't clear myself. Your father, he was my commanding officer before he left the army. When everything fell apart, he was the only one who still believed in me. She hesitated. And the dog attack? A ghost of a smile. Coincidence. I was 16, working summer shifts at the park. You wandered away from your nanny. The dog got loose. Anyone would have stepped in. Not everyone would have taken 47 stitches for a stranger's kid, she said quietly. Jack shrugged. Your father never forgot. When my career ended, he made sure I had a purpose again. The marriage was his way of keeping me close enough to protect you after he was gone. Evelyn absorbed that in silence. For years, she had thought herself bound by a debt. Now she realized she was the one being shielded. Why agree to it? She asked finally. Why let me treat you like nothing? His gaze drifted away, his voice barely audible. Because I deserved worse. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt tears burn the corners of her eyes. Not for herself, but for the man in front of her, carrying guilt like armor. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision, one that would change everything between them. She was done pretending Jack Dawson didn't matter. The first change was small enough to pass unnoticed by anyone who wasn't paying attention. Evelyn added a name to a list. By mid-morning, the name had propagated across the building's security systems and access logs, unlocking doors that had previously denied him. Clearance elevated. Assignment, reassigned to the CEO's personal detail. Within hours, a memo followed, an innocuous line item among a dozen mundane administrative updates. No fanfare, no meeting, just an alteration of proximity. Jack Dawson now stood at the edge of her every doorway. People noticed. Of course they did. An empire runs on rumor as much as it runs on contracts. "Who is he?" whispered an assistant in the elevator. "Someone she's seeing, a procurement exec guest. Someone who has something on her," another muttered darkly. Evelyn ignored it all. The decision wasn't about optics. It was a vow, made in a small apartment with a cooling cup of tea between them. No more shadows. She started with basic corrections. Personal security protocols were rewritten. Redundancies were added. Human choke points were identified and sealed. The audit report, commissioned under a generic threat assessment code, arrived in a sealed folder on her desk 2 days later. Jack's notes covered the margins in a precise, economical hand. Weak batch control in freight corridors. Third-party vendors insufficiently vetted. Response drills rehearsed, never randomized. Each annotation was actionable. Each carried a quiet indictment of complacency. She called the head of security into her office. "We're overhauling the whole system," she said. "Use these recommendations as your map." The man glanced at the notes, then at Jack, who stood a step behind her shoulder. "May I ask who authored?" "You may not," Evelyn said, calm and clipped. "Just implement." They did. Within a week, contractors were retrained, schedules scrambled. Vendor contracts reopened with new clauses. Jack said nothing publicly. He didn't need to. People began to understand that the quiet guard now had the CEO's ear, and her trust. Trust. The word snagged in her chest whenever she thought it. Not a thing she gave lightly. Not a thing she'd ever given without conditions. In the quiet spaces between meetings and restructured security, she found herself learning the texture of Jack's silence. It wasn't evasive, she realized. It was careful. He answered what needed answering, offered what helped, withheld what would only turn to noise in the air. The second change wasn't small. It arrived with 2 suitcases and a decision already made. He opened his apartment door to find her standing there, the hallway light making a halo of her hair. "What's this?" he asked. "I'm moving in," she said, as if she were stating a weather report. He didn't step aside immediately. "You have a penthouse." "Had," she corrected. "I'm listing it." "Evelyn." "I'm not asking permission, Jack." She lifted a suitcase over the threshold. "We're married. I'm just finally showing up." He held her gaze, and for the first time since she'd known him, uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. He stepped back. The door closed. The sound of a latch settling felt like a knot loosening inside her. The apartment was as she'd left it, orderly, sparse, honest. They stood in the small entry space, not touching, as if proximity itself required relearning. "Tell me where you want things," she said. "Anywhere you'll remember them," he answered. They learned. The first week was stilted choreography. She left files on surfaces he considered sacred, clean counters, clear tables. He stacked them into tidy, accusing towers. She worked at odd hours, speaking softly into a headset while pacing the length of the living room. He brewed coffee at 5:30, measured the grounds by weight and habit. She teased him about the scale. He teased her about never measuring anything but market risk. They collided over the stove, a battleground divided by technique and history. She had never cooked for herself. He cooked like a field medic, precise, resourceful, never wasting motion. The first meal they made together, eggs, toast, a pan that was a minute too hot, was both terrible and perfect. They ate it on the couch, laughing without warning, as if their bodies had remembered a language their minds had forgotten. Her presence altered the apartment's geometry. A throw blanket landed on the back of the couch. A plant appeared in the window, then another. A photograph, just one, took a corner of a bookshelf. Evelyn at 13, wind lashed on a cliff in Ireland. Hair wild, face unguarded. She never would have displayed it at the penthouse. Here it made sense. At night, sleep came to them like a truce. His nightmares visited less often, announced by the tightening of his breath. She learned the signs the way she learned a board's politics, the twitch of a jaw, the fault line that runs through a voice. When the dream claws caught him, she woke him without words, grounding him with a hand on his chest, counting breaths against her palm. In the mornings, coffee steamed on the balcony, their ritual carved from ordinary grace. They didn't talk about what the night took. They talked about the day they could build. On Sundays, he introduced her to old films. She rolled her eyes at the black and white dramatics, then ended up quoting lines 2 days later in a budget meeting. He smirked. She pretended not to notice. He taught her how to break a hold. They pushed the coffee table against the wall and turned the living room into a training mat. Leverage, not force, he said, showing her a wrist escape, slow, controlled. She moved through it awkwardly, then again, then faster. When she executed it cleanly, he nodded once, the ghost of approval. She felt it like sunlight. "You don't have to become a soldier," he said. "I have to stop being a target," she answered. Work intruded, as it must. The investigation into the kidnapping sniffed down dark corridors and came back with a scent. A rival contractor with a long memory and short ethics. Nothing that would hold up in a courtroom, everything that mattered in the real world. A subcontractor of a subcontractor, a shell company with a familiar accountant, money flowing like water through fingers. Insufficient for legal action, her general counsel said. Sufficient for changes, Evelyn replied. She rewired their vendor ecosystem with surgical ruthlessness. Contracts ended quietly. New partners emerged with cleaner books and better references. The board grumbled about disruption. Quarterly forecasts demanded stability. She listened, nodded, and changed nothing. The company stayed profitable. The company became safer. The company began to look, in small ways, like the person running it. The rumors about Jack changed timbre as visibility did its slow, relentless work. At first, the whispers were salacious. "I hear they're sleeping together." Then conspiratorial. "He must have something on her." Then cautious. "He catches things others miss." Finally, inevitably, respectful. "Ask Dawson. He'll know." He remained. Silent, kept to the edges of rooms, and yet the ground shifted wherever he stood. One night, with a mediocre documentary flickering across the TV, Jack asked without turning to her, "Why did you hate me?" She considered lying. It would be easier to call it misunderstanding, to pretend it wasn't anger, but indifference. But he had earned the truth. "I didn't hate you," she said. "I hated the idea of you. What you represented. My father's last command." She took a slow sip of wine, buying time for the words to arrange themselves. "He controlled my education, my first job, my succession. Even after he was gone, he controlled me through you. Or that's what I thought." It felt like a final reach from the grave. "And now?" Jack asked. "And now," she said, putting the glass down, "I think he wasn't controlling me. He was protecting me the only way he knew how." Jack was quiet long enough that the documentary's narration seemed to expand to fill the room. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Robert was good at that. Protecting people. "I was cruel to you," she said. "Not just cold. Cruel. I'm sorry." He didn't rush to accept it. He didn't make it easy for her, and she was grateful. He just looked at her, really looked, the way a man examines a map before moving, then nodded once. "Thank you." It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. It felt real. Their worlds, once parallel, began to intersect. She took him to a small dinner with engineers who had spent 20 years in clean rooms and prototypes. Jack asked questions that respected their work rather than performed interest. He said we, when he could have said they. They noticed. He invited her to the community center where he'd started volunteering. "They don't need a CEO," he warned, almost apologetic. "They need consistency. A room that feels safe at the same time every week." "I can be consistent," she said. "You can be busy," he countered, not unkindly. She showed up anyway, quiet, present, sleeves pushed up, and learned names. The first time a teenager rolled her eyes at corporate speak and challenged her to a push-up contest, Evelyn dropped to the mat and won by 2. Respect is a language. She was multilingual. The apartment changed again, slowly, as if following a new season. The grid of war photos stayed, but now a frame sat among them. A candid shot of Jack teaching a small boy how to stand with his feet grounded. Another frame captured Evelyn mid-laugh, powdered sugar dusting her cheek from a failed donut experiment. It was the first time she'd seen what her face looked like when she wasn't performing competence. One evening, during a lull that felt like contentment, Evelyn spoke into the quiet. "I want you beside me at some events. Not as security, as my husband." He didn't ask why. He asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes. It will start a fire." "Then let it burn," she said, and surprised herself with the ferocity in it. "I'm done hiding what matters." He studied her for a beat, then gave a small nod. "Okay." The next week, they walked into a charity gala together. Heads tilted. Whispers thrummed like a low current. Cameras found them in seconds. Evelyn's spine was a line drawn with purpose. Jack's presence was a quiet gravitational field, the kind that steadies rather than demands. She introduced him simply, directly. "My husband, Jack Dawson." No additional biography. No curated origin story. Just the fact, placed like a foundation stone. It shifted something tectonic inside her. Naming the truth in public is its own kind of armor. Back at the apartment, late and barefoot, she leaned against the counter while he loosened his tie. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the day's small victories, of missteps that didn't matter, of a future that was beginning to sketch itself without asking permission. She thought of her father's grave and the arguments she used to carry there like offerings. She thought of the warehouse, of the hood pulled from her head, of the way dim light had found Jack's face and rewritten 3 years of contempt in a single breath. "We're different now," she said, not sure if she was asking or telling. Jack looked at her for a long moment, then crossed the room and set his hands gently on her hips, not pulling, just anchoring. "We're honest now," he said. "Honesty is a line you cross only once. On the far side of it, the air tastes different. On the far side, you realize how long you've been holding your breath." Evelyn exhaled. Somewhere, in the maze of contracts and caution, the next move was already assembling itself. She would have to stand on a stage soon, facing a room full of men in suits and women with fortunes and the cameras that love them. She would have to say something that could not be unsaid. But not tonight. Tonight there was a small kitchen, and a pan that was finally the right temperature, and a man who had saved her twice, now saving her in quieter ways she had never learned to ask for. The Collins Defense Group's annual shareholder meeting was the kind of event where nothing unexpected happened. Suits arrived early, shook the right hands, and sipped coffee in polite silence while numbers flickered on massive screens. Evelyn had mastered the choreography. Profit projections, contract wins, technological breakthroughs, each delivered with precise, almost surgical confidence. But this year, anticipation crackled under the surface. Whispers curled through the aisles. "She's announcing something big." No one could agree on what. A merger? A buyout? Something that would send the stock price into orbit? Backstage, Evelyn stood in a shaft of muted light, reviewing her notes one last time. Her voice would open with the usual fiscal triumphs, strategic positioning, and end somewhere entirely new. She could feel Jack beside her, close enough to be a presence without being a shadow. He wore a dark tailored suit, the kind that could have been issued by the military if the military cared about couture. The transformation was striking. Gone was the security guard. In his place stood a man with a bearing that commanded attention without demanding it. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "Yes," she said, fingers tightening on her cue cards. "I do. You're about to burn down walls you've spent years building. Then I guess I'd better enjoy the fire." The stage manager's hand signal cut off any reply. Evelyn stepped into the lights. The first 30 minutes were flawless. Charts, graphs, and numbers fell from her lips with the ease of someone who had lived them, not just rehearsed them. The board nodded. The investors smiled. If anyone was waiting for something more, she gave no sign until the moment arrived. "Before we conclude," she said, letting the weight of the pause settle over the room, I have a personal announcement." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. The press leaned forward. Evelyn rarely spoke of her private life. When she did, it was through controlled, meaningless sound bites. "For the past 3 years, many of you have speculated about my personal relationships, or lack thereof." She let a small, knowing smile touch her lips. "Today, I'd like to introduce someone." She turned toward the wings. "Jack, would you join me?" The sound in the room shifted. Not the sharp crackle of shock, but a building murmur of curiosity. Jack walked out, unhurried, posture straight, eyes scanning, but never flinching from the attention. Cameras flashed like lightning against the dark walls. "This is Jack Dawson," Evelyn said. "My husband." Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of reporters scribbling notes. She let them have their moment, then continued. "Many of you have seen him before, patrolling our lobbies as a member of our security team. What you didn't know, what I didn't fully appreciate until recently, is that Jack Dawson is not only my husband on paper. He is the man who has saved my life, not once, but twice." She told them briefly about the summer when she was 7, the dog attack, the teenage boy who stepped between her and danger. Then she described, without naming names or locations, the night of her recent kidnapping and the man who brought her back. "Jack is a decorated former Delta Force operator. My father knew his worth long before I did. And here is the truth. I have treated him with arrogance, with dismissal, with a pride that blinded me to his worth. Today, I am here to correct that." The room went still. Vulnerability from Evelyn Collins was not a thing they had ever been offered. She turned toward him, her voice softer, but still clear enough to carry. "Jack, I am sorry for my contempt, my disrespect, my failure to see the man you are." The pause stretched. A reporter called out, "Mr. Dawson, do you forgive her?" Jack, for all his years of avoiding the spotlight, didn't flinch. His voice carried easily. "I never blamed her." The simplicity of it cracked the atmosphere. Applause began in one corner, hesitant, then spread until it became a standing wave. Evelyn took his hand, not in a staged politician's gesture, but in something uncalculated, and lifted it to her lips. The next words she spoke were not about her company, but about something new. "In honor of my husband's service, and the thousands of veterans who returned from war carrying invisible wounds, I am founding the Second Guard Foundation. Our mission, to provide therapy, career training, and community for those who have served and now must find a way to live again. I will personally fund it with $20 million to start." She didn't glance at the board. She didn't need to. This wasn't for them. Jack will serve as the foundation's executive director, bringing his first-hand understanding to every decision we make. This is not charity, it's responsibility. The applause came faster this time, without hesitation. As they left the stage together, Jack leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You realize the tabloids will have a field day?" Evelyn smiled, an unguarded, real smile. "Let them. I'm done hiding what matters." In the weeks that followed, change came fast. Evelyn added Dawson to her name on company letterhead. She sold the penthouse, funneling the proceeds into the foundation's expansion. She and Jack moved into a brownstone in a neighborhood that most of her peers would never set foot in. The community center down the street had been on the brink of closing. Jack approached the director with an offer. Free self-defense classes for local youth, 3 nights a week, no strings attached. At first, only 3 kids showed up, all skeptical. Within 2 months, the mats were crowded with teenagers learning to ground themselves, to measure their strength, to control it. Jack didn't preach. He taught by example, by showing up exactly when he said he would, by listening more than he spoke. Parents who'd eyed him warily began to greet him warmly. One boy told him, quietly, that the classes had given him a reason to avoid a gang. Jack didn't tell Evelyn that right away, but she saw it in the way his posture eased when he came home. Meanwhile, she leveraged her corporate network to create job placement pipelines for veterans. Companies wanting contracts with Collins Defense Group quickly learned that hiring Second Guard graduates was a smart move for business and for their standing with the CEO. The Ice Queen nickname started to fade. She was still formidable, still brilliant, but something had shifted. Her quarterly calls included foundation updates, The press began to speak of her as a pioneer in corporate responsibility. At home, the walls filled slowly with photographs, not just of Jack's brothers-in-arms, but of the kids from the community center, of second guard events, of small moments neither of them would have bothered to capture before. One night, as snow feathered past the Brownstone's windows, Evelyn and Jack sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket. The air was sharp, but neither moved to go inside. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if those men hadn't taken me that night?" she asked. Jack thought for a long moment. "You'd have gone on running your empire. I'd have gone on watching from the shadows." "And we'd have stayed alone," she said. He nodded. "Both of us." The snow caught in the streetlight between them. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for saving me, twice, but for letting me become this version of myself." His hand found hers under the blanket, steady and warm. "And what version is that?" She smiled. "Someone who remembers what matters." Saturday mornings had a rhythm now. Jack's rhythm. The coffee pot clicked on at 6 a.m., its quiet drip a cue for the rest of the day. By 8, the mats at the community center were unrolled, and the first of his students shuffled in, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, some bouncing with barely contained energy. Evelyn arrived just before the last half hour of class, balancing 2 containers of still-warm banana bread she'd baked herself. The smell drew immediate attention. The younger ones gathered around the folding table, pretending not to hover, while Jack wrapped up a demonstration on evading a chokehold. She leaned against the wall, watching him work. The kids didn't just listen to him, they mirrored him. His movements, his posture, even his way of pausing before answering a question. That kind of trust wasn't something you could buy. It was something you earned, inch by inch, until it stuck. When he dismissed them, the banana bread vanished in minutes. A new girl, 8, maybe 9 years old, hung back, eyeing Evelyn's clothes with frank curiosity. "Are you Mr. Jack's boss?" she asked. Evelyn smiled. "No. I used to be someone who needed saving. Now, I'm someone who gets to be grateful." The girl didn't fully understand, but she nodded, satisfied enough, and darted off with her friends. The Second Guard Foundation was no longer just a press release charity. In under a year, it had become a network, part therapy center, part job placement pipeline, part safe harbor for veterans who'd been drifting. Evelyn had the numbers, retention rates, mental health outcomes, skill certifications. But she preferred the stories. The former sniper who now coached a high school track team. The communications officer who opened a tech repair shop in her hometown. The single father who, after months of therapy, finally laughed again in front of his kids. Jack hated the galas that came with the foundation's growth, but he endured them when she asked. He spoke sparingly, letting her field the speeches. But when someone important leaned in to ask, "Does it really make a difference?" Jack's eyes would harden, and his answer would cut through the noise. "It makes the difference." At home, their life was nothing like the one either of them had imagined, if they'd imagined one at all. The brownstone wasn't large, but it fit them. Jack's military precision blended with Evelyn's quiet eye for comfort. Plants flourished in the sunlit front room. The bookshelf was a study in coexistence, her business strategy tomes beside his well-worn classics. A framed photograph of her and Jack at the shareholder meeting, his expression unreadable, but his hand resting lightly on her back, stood between them. They still didn't talk about love in grand declarations. Instead, it existed in smaller, steadier forms. The way he woke her gently from the rare nightmare. The way she made his coffee exactly how he liked it without needing to ask. The way their movements in the kitchen flowed without collision. Winter loosened its grip on the city, and spring came with a kind of restless clarity. On the anniversary of her father's death, Evelyn suggested they visit his grave. They walked in silence through the manicured rows, stopping before the polished headstone. "I used to come here to fight with him," she admitted. "About the company. About you." Jack didn't interrupt. "I thought I knew what he wanted for me, power, legacy, success. But maybe all he wanted was for me to be safe, to not be alone." Jack's hand found hers. "You'd be proud of you," he said. She squeezed his fingers. "I hope so. Because I'm not done changing things." Change came in unexpected places. One evening, they sat at their small kitchen table with takeout containers between them. Jack was reviewing grant proposals for second guard when Evelyn asked, "Do you ever think about Kandahar?" His hand stilled over the papers. "Every day." She reached across, her fingertips brushing the back of his hand. "And does it feel any different now?" Jack considered, then nodded slightly. "It's still there. It always will be. But it's quieter." "Good," she said. "I don't want you to forget it. I just don't want it to own you." For a long moment, he looked at her, something unspoken passing between them, an understanding that they couldn't erase the past, but they could live in spite of it. That summer, the community center hosted an open house. Evelyn stood off to the side while Jack demonstrated a disarm technique with one of the older students. A reporter from a local paper approached her. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "you've gone from running a defense empire to running a foundation. Do you think one matters more than the other?" She watched Jack on the mat, his patience, the way the room's energy shifted toward him like plants to sunlight. "There are different kinds of defense," she said. "One protects borders. The other protects people. My father built the first. Jack taught me the second." The reporter scribbled something, but Evelyn didn't wait for the next question. She crossed the room and took a seat on the edge of the mat, next to a pair of barefoot kids practicing their stances. Jack glanced at her. A flicker of a smile passed between them, quick, private, unmistakable. That night, as they locked up the Brownstone, Evelyn paused on the front step. The street was quiet. A warm breeze carried the faint sound of music from somewhere blocks away. "We've both been broken," she said softly. Jack turned the key in the lock. And somehow, between us, we found the parts that still work. Built something whole out of them." He stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Not a fairy tale," he said. "No," she agreed. "Better." For a moment, they stayed like that, the city moving on without them, the night stretching ahead. There would be more challenges, enemies they couldn't yet see, scars that wouldn't vanish. But there would also be mornings on the balcony, banana bread in the community center kitchen, hands finding each other in crowded rooms. They had saved each other in different ways at different times. And now, finally, they walked forward together, not out of debt or obligation, but out of choice.